I didn't mean to spill the water, but there it was, a cool rush against my skin, soaking through the thin fabric of my dress and leaving it clinging uncomfortably to me. I gasped, startled by the cold, and clumsily reached for a napkin, only to knock the empty glass off the edge of the table. "Careful," Nathan said, his voice calm but tinged with amusement. I looked up, flustered, and found him watching me. The way his eyes flickered, just briefly, to where the damp fabric clung to my chest before snapping back to my face, made my breath hitch. It was such a small thing, so fleeting, but it left the air between us charged in a way I didn't know how to name. "Here," he said, grabbing a dish towel from the counter. He handed it to me, his fingers brushing mine as I took it. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said quickly, though my cheeks burned as I pressed the towel against my dress. It was a casual lunch, just the two of us. Nothing out of the ordinary. He'd moved back home after college to save money while figuring out his next steps, and I'd welcomed the company. The house had been too quiet for too long, and having someone else here, a warm presence in the kitchen, the faint sound of footsteps upstairs, made it feel less like a mausoleum. But moments like this, they weren't supposed to happen. Nathan leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, his lips curving into a small, knowing smile. "You really are clumsy sometimes." I rolled my eyes, trying to brush off the moment as if it didn't matter. "I've always been like this," I said lightly, though my voice wavered. "You know that." "Yeah," he said, his tone softer now. "I do." There was something in the way he said it, something that made my heart beat just a little faster. I looked away, focusing on dabbing at the damp spot on my dress, and tried to ignore the heat creeping up my neck. The truth was, I hadn't felt this self-conscious in years, not since before his father passed. Back then, I'd been too busy balancing the demands of a blended family and a husband who expected everything to be just so. But now, with no one to answer to, I'd fallen into a quiet routine, simple meals, quiet nights, and the occasional glass of wine to keep me company. Nathan's return had disrupted that routine in ways I hadn't anticipated. He was taller now, broader, with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. And while I still thought of him as the boy I'd helped raise, moments like these made it hard to ignore the man he'd become. "Do you want me to get you another dress?" he asked, nodding toward the damp spot that was still painfully obvious. "No," I said quickly. "This will dry in no time." "Suit yourself," he said with a shrug, though his eyes lingered on me for a moment longer, before he turned to pour himself another glass of water. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, my heart still racing. It was nothing, I told myself. Just a moment of awkwardness. But the way my chest tightened, the way my skin prickled under his gaze, it felt like the beginning of something I wasn't ready to name. The afternoon sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, casting golden patterns on the kitchen floor. I had thought the moment from lunch was behind us, a silly accident I could laugh off later. But as I stood at the sink rinsing the plates, my mind kept replaying the way Nathan's eyes had lingered. I tried to shake it off, focusing instead on the rhythmic sound of water running and the familiar comfort of domestic tasks. The house, usually so quiet, felt heavier now, charged with something unspoken I couldn't quite name. "Need a hand?" His voice startled me, and I turned to see Nathan leaning against the doorway, his arms crossed casually. He had changed into a plain white t-shirt and jeans, his hair slightly tousled from running a hand through it. "I'm fine," I said a little too quickly. "It's just a few dishes." He stepped into the room anyway, rolling up his sleeves as he approached the sink. "I'm here, might as well help," he said with a small shrug. Before I could protest, he reached for a dish towel and began drying the plates I handed him. We worked side by side in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of the water and the soft clink of dishes the only thing breaking the quiet. It felt normal, familiar, like so many moments we'd shared in this kitchen over the years, and yet I couldn't shake the awareness of his presence. The way his arm brushed against mine as he reached for another plate, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. "You're quieter than usual," he said suddenly, his voice breaking through my thoughts. I glanced at him, startled. "Am I?" He nodded, his gaze flicking to me briefly before returning to the plate in his hands. "You've been distracted all day." "I've just got a lot on my mind," I said, turning back to the sink. Like what? The question was simple, casual, but it caught me off guard. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. Just the usual, I said vaguely, hoping he wouldn't press. But Nathan wasn't one to let things go. The usual, huh? He said, a faint teasing note in his voice. You're always taking care of everything. Maybe you need someone to take care of you for a change. I froze, the plate in my hand slipping slightly under the water. Nathan, that's not. I'm serious, he said, his tone softening. You do so much for everyone else. When's the last time you let someone help you? I didn't have an answer for that. He reached over and gently took the plate from my hands, his fingers brushing mine. The touch was brief, but it sent a shiver up my spine. Let me finish this, he said quietly. For a moment, I wanted to argue, to insist I didn't need help. But the look in his eyes, steady, sincere, made my protest falter. I stepped back, drying my hands on a towel as he turned back to the sink. I watched him work, his movements unhurried, his focus on the task in front of him. It was such a small thing, but the sight of him standing there, sleeves rolled up, water dripping from his hands, it was impossible to ignore how much he'd changed. How's the job hunt going? I asked, trying to steer the conversation to safer ground. He glanced over his shoulder, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Slow, he admitted. Seems like every listing wants 5 years of experience for an entry-level position. You'll find something, I said, my voice firm. You're smart, capable. It's just a matter of time. Thanks, he said, turning back to the sink. It means a lot, coming from you. There was something in the way he said it, soft, almost hesitant, that made my chest tighten. I turned away, busying myself with wiping down the counter. I mean it, he said, his voice quieter now. You've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. I paused, my hand stilling on the cloth. Of course I believe in you, I said softly. I've seen what you're capable of. When I looked at him, he was watching me, his gaze steady and unflinching. The intensity of it made my breath catch, and for a moment, I felt as though the world had narrowed to just the two of us. You've always been there for me, he said, his voice low, even when you didn't have to be. It's what family does, I said, though my voice trembled slightly. Maybe, he said, his lips curving into a faint, almost bittersweet smile. But not everyone does it the way you do. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken, and I felt my pulse quicken. I looked away, focusing on the countertop as I tried to steady myself. When the last dish was dried and put away, Nathan leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. Thanks for letting me help, he said, his tone light but his gaze lingering on me. You didn't exactly give me a choice, I said, forcing a small smile. He grinned, the tension between us easing slightly. Fair enough. As he turned to leave the kitchen, I let out a shaky breath, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. But before he stepped through the doorway, he paused, glancing back at me. You should let yourself relax more, he said softly. You deserve it. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the quiet kitchen, his words echoing in my mind. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the rapid beat of my heart, and wondered why something so simple, so small, had left me feeling like the ground beneath me had shifted. The afternoon sun was gentle, casting soft, golden light over the backyard. A light breeze stirred the leaves of the old oak tree, sending shifting patterns of shadow across the patio, where I sat with a cold glass of lemonade. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, and the faint sweetness of the honeysuckle that climbed along the garden fence. Nathan had suggested taking a break after we finished cleaning up the kitchen. Let's sit outside for a bit, he'd said, already grabbing a chair and carrying it out to the patio. I'd agreed, mostly because I couldn't think of a reason not to. Though part of me wondered if being alone with him out here was a good idea. He lounged in the chair beside me, his long legs stretched out and crossed at the ankles. He held a glass of iced tea in one hand, the condensation trickling down the sides, while the other rested casually on the armrest. His t-shirt clung to his chest in the summer heat, and the sunlight made the hints of red in his dark hair gleam. This is nice, he said after a moment, tilting his head back to look at the sky. It is, I agreed, though my focus was less on the scenery and more on the quiet tension I couldn't seem to shake. It wasn't uncomfortable, exactly, but there was an awareness in the air between us, a weight to every glance, every pause. I told myself I was imagining it, but the flutter in my chest told me otherwise. You used to come out here all the time, Nathan said, breaking the silence. I remember you and Dad sitting on this patio, drinking wine and talking late into the night. The mention of his father sent a pang through me, bittersweet and familiar. We did, I said softly. He loved this spot. Nathan nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I never understood how he could just sit and stare at the trees for hours, but now I get it. I glanced at him, surprised. You've changed, I said without thinking. He looked at me, one brow lifting in amusement. How so? You used to be restless, I said, swirling the ice in my glass. Always moving, always doing something. Sitting still wasn't really your thing. Nathan chuckled, the sound low and warm. I guess I've had time to think. College will do that to you, especially when you don't have everything figured out. His tone had shifted, growing quieter, more thoughtful. I turned to him, studying his profile, the set of his jaw, the way his brows furrowed slightly as he stared into the distance. You don't have to have everything figured out, I said gently. Life doesn't work that way. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, but it feels like I'm supposed to. Like everyone expects me to have some grand plan, and I don't. Whose expectations are you trying to meet? I asked, tilting my head. Nathan hesitated, then glanced at me, his gaze steady. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe, mine. Or maybe I'm just scared of disappointing people. My heart ached at his honesty, and I reached over without thinking, placing my hand over his. You could never disappoint me, I said softly. His eyes flickered to where our hands touched, and I realized too late what I'd done. I started to pull away, but his fingers closed over mine, holding me there. Thank you, he said, his voice low and warm. For a moment we stayed like that, the world around us quiet and still. I could feel the heat of his skin, the strength in his grip, and my heart raced in a way I hadn't felt in years. I pulled my hand back, the loss of his touch leaving a strange hollowness in its wake. You don't have to figure everything out today, I said, my voice a little unsteady. Nathan smiled faintly, but his eyes lingered on me. Neither do you, he said softly. His words hit me harder than I expected, and I looked away, focusing on the garden. The truth of it settled heavily in my chest. I'd spent so long trying to keep everything together, trying to be the rock, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone else carry even a little of the weight. We fell into a companionable silence, the kind that felt both soothing and charged. The afternoon stretched on, the golden light shifting as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Eventually, Nathan stood, stretching his arms over his head. I should get started on dinner, he said, his tone light. You're cooking? I asked, raising a brow. Don't sound so surprised, he teased. I've picked up a few skills since I burned that frozen pizza in high school. I laughed, the sound easing some of the tension in my chest. Well, I'm looking forward to it, I said, standing and gathering my glass. As we walked back into the house, I couldn't help but steal a glance at him, my heart still racing from the moment we'd shared. Whatever this was, whatever was building between us, it was becoming harder to ignore. And part of me didn't want to. The soft strains of the piano filled the house, wrapping around me like a familiar, haunting melody. I stood at the edge of the living room, the dim glow of the table lamp casting a warm light over Nathan as he played. His back was to me, his shoulders relaxed, his hands gliding effortlessly over the keys. I didn't know he still played. The sight of him there, lost in the music, caught me off guard. It wasn't something he'd done often, at least not since high school, and the unexpectedness of it stirred something deep inside me, a strange mix of nostalgia and tenderness. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should interrupt. But as the melody shifted, softening into something slower, more wistful, I found myself stepping into the room. You've been hiding this talent, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. Nathan's hand stilled and he turned slightly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I didn't know you were listening. It's hard not to, I said, moving closer. You're really good. He chuckled, turning back to the piano. I wouldn't go that far. It's just something I mess around with when I need to clear my head. Well, it's beautiful, I said, settling into the armchair near the piano. Nathan glanced at me, his smile fading into something more thoughtful. This was Dad's favorite song, he said quietly. I felt my chest tighten at the mention of his father. He used to hum it all the time, I said, my voice soft. Nathan nodded, his fingers brushing over the keys. I started learning it for him when I was a kid. Never told him, though. I wanted it to be a surprise. The weight of his words hung in the air, and I felt a familiar ache settle in my chest. He would have loved that, I said, my voice trembling slightly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, but not uncomfortable, as though the music had opened a door to something we both carried but rarely acknowledged. Nathan's hands returned to the keys, his movements slower now, more deliberate. The melody began again, soft and steady, and I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me. "Do you want to try?" he asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the music. My eyes opened, and I blinked at him, startled. "Me?" he nodded, scooting over slightly on the bench. "Come on, it's easy." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "I don't think so. I'm terrible at anything that requires coordination." Nathan grinned, patting the empty space beside him. "I'll help you. Come on." I hesitated, but something in his expression, a quiet, playful determination, made it impossible to say no. With a sigh, I stood and moved to sit beside him, the small bench forcing us closer than I expected. "Okay," he said, his tone light. "Just follow my lead." He placed my hands on the keys, his fingers brushing against mine as he guided them. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver up my spine, and I swallowed hard, trying to focus on the music instead of the way his leg pressed against mine. "See?" he said, his voice low and close to my ear. "Not so hard." I laughed softly, my fingers fumbling over the keys. "I'm pretty sure I just butchered that." "You're doing fine," he said, his tone warm. For the next few minutes he guided me through the melody, his hands occasionally covering mine to correct my movements. The closeness between us was undeniable, each touch, each brush of his arm against mine, adding to the quiet tension that had been building for weeks. At one point, he reached over to press a key I'd missed, his hand lingering on mine for just a moment too long. I froze, my breath catching, and when I looked at him, his gaze was already on me. The room felt impossibly still, the air between us charged with something I couldn't name. "Nathan?" I began, my voice barely above a whisper. His hand slid away and he straightened, clearing his throat. "Sorry," he said, his tone quieter now. "I got carried away." "It's fine," I said quickly, though my heart was still racing. He stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "I think that's enough music for one night," he said with a faint smile. "Yeah," I murmured, standing as well. For a moment we stood there, the unspoken tension between us almost unbearable. I wanted to say something to break the silence, but the words wouldn't come. "I'll clean up here," he said finally, his tone casual. "You should get some rest." I nodded, my hands trembling slightly as I turned to leave the room. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, the soft strains of the piano began again, quieter this time. Almost hesitant. I paused, my hand resting on the banister, and let the music wash over me one last time before retreating into the safety of the dark. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that only comes late at night when the world outside has gone dark, and the only sound is the faint creak of old floorboards beneath careful steps. I hadn't been able to sleep, not after everything that had happened earlier. My mind felt like a tangled mess of thoughts and emotions, each one more confusing than the last. The dim light of the kitchen drew me in like a beacon, and I stepped inside, the cool tile beneath my feet grounding me. I poured myself a glass of water, letting the silence settle around me, but then, as I turned, I nearly dropped the glass. Nathan was standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the hallway light. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice low, husky from the late hour. I shook my head, trying to steady my racing heart. "No, you?" "Same," he said, stepping into the room. He was barefoot, wearing just a t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair slightly mussed as if he'd been lying awake, tossing and turning. He moved to the counter, leaning against it as he watched me. "You've been quiet today," he said softly. I let out a small, humorless laugh, setting the glass down on the counter. "You've said that before." "That's because it's true," he said, his tone light but probing. "What's going on?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Nathan tilted his head, his gaze steady and unrelenting. "That's not like you," he said. "You always know, or at least, you pretend to." His words struck a nerve, and I felt a flush of irritation rise in my chest. Maybe I'm tired of pretending, I snapped, the words escaping before I could stop them. Nathan straightened, his brow furrowing. Tired of pretending what? I hesitated, my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the counter. The weight of everything I'd been holding back felt unbearable, and for a moment I wanted to tell him. I wanted to let it all out, to stop hiding, but instead, I shook my head, turning away. It doesn't matter, I said quietly. It does to me, he said, his voice firm but gentle. The intensity in his tone made me pause, and I turned back to him, my heart pounding. Nathan, He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, and suddenly the space between us felt impossibly small. Talk to me, he said softly, please. I swallowed hard, my chest tight as I met his gaze. There was something in his eyes, something raw and vulnerable, that made it impossible to look away. I've been lost, I admitted finally, the words trembling as they left my lips. Ever since your father passed, I've been trying to hold everything together, but I don't know who I am anymore. Nathan's expression softened, and he took another step closer, his hand brushing lightly against mine on the counter. You don't have to hold it all together, he said quietly. Not by yourself. His touch sent a shiver through me, and I felt my breath hitch. It's not that simple, I said, my voice breaking. Maybe it is, he said, his thumb tracing a slow circle against the back of my hand. Maybe you've just convinced yourself it's not. I stared at him, my heart racing as his words sank in. There was no judgment in his tone, no pressure, just quiet reassurance, a steady presence that made me feel like I could finally let my guard down. You don't understand, I whispered. Then help me understand, he said, his voice soft but insistent. The silence between us stretched, heavy and charged, as I struggled to find the words. But before I could speak, Nathan's hand moved, his fingers brushing my cheek. The touch was light, hesitant, as if he were waiting for me to pull away. I didn't. Nathan, I said softly, my voice trembling. He leaned in slightly, his forehead nearly touching mine. Tell me to stop, he murmured, his breath warm against my skin. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it, and every nerve in my body felt alive, electrified. But I didn't tell him to stop. Instead, I let out a shaky breath, my eyes fluttering shut as his lips brushed against mine. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if he were giving me one last chance to pull away. But I didn't. My hands found his shoulders, gripping tightly as the kiss deepened, the weight of everything we'd been holding back spilling over in a rush of emotion. When we finally pulled apart, our breaths coming fast and uneven, Nathan rested his forehead against mine, his hands still cradling my face. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice raw. For what? I asked, my voice barely audible. For complicating things, he said. For making this harder for you. I shook my head, tears stinging at the corners of my eyes. It's not just you, I said softly. I'm just as responsible. Nathan's thumb brushed against my cheek, wiping away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. You don't have to decide anything right now, he said. I needed you to know how I feel. His words left me breathless, and I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The quiet between us was thick with unspoken words. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. The next evening, the tension between us was almost unbearable. The house felt too small, every shared glance too loaded, every moment alone too charged. I'd spent the day trying to keep busy, cleaning, organizing, anything to avoid the weight of Nathan's confession and the kiss we'd shared the night before. But now, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the golden light of dusk spilled through the windows, I found myself in the living room, absently folding a blanket. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the ceiling fan, and I could feel his presence before I saw him. Nathan, I said softly, not turning around. Hey, he replied, his voice low, careful. I turned to face him, my hands twisting in the fabric of the blanket. He was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame, his expression unreadable. He looked younger like this, in his plain t-shirt and jeans, but there was something in his eyes that felt heavier, older. We need to talk, I said, my voice trembling slightly. He stepped into the room, his movements slow and deliberate. Yeah, he said, his tone quiet. We do. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy, and I struggled to find the right words. About last night, I began, my voice faltering. That shouldn't have happened. Nathan's jaw tightened and he nodded slowly. I know, he said, though there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Hurt, maybe, that made my chest ache. It's not that I don't. I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. It's just complicated. Of course it's complicated, he said, his voice sharper now. But that doesn't mean it wasn't real. His words hit me like a blow, and I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Nathan, we can't. Why not? He interrupted, stepping closer. Why can't we? Because it's wrong, I said, my voice breaking. Because people would never understand. Because I'm supposed to be the one who sets boundaries. And what about what we feel? He asked, his tone quieter now but no less intense. Does that not matter? It matters, I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Of course it matters, but it doesn't make it right. Nathan closed the distance between us, his hands clenched at his sides. I don't care what anyone else thinks, he said fiercely. I care about you, and I think you care about me too. I looked up at him, my breath catching at the raw vulnerability in his expression. Nathan? Just tell me the truth, he said, his voice trembling. Do you feel the same way, or am I imagining this? I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. The truth was too heavy, too dangerous, and I was terrified of what might happen if I said it out loud. But the silence between us was answer enough. Nathan stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine. You don't have to be scared, he said softly. I'm not going anywhere. The warmth of his touch, the steadiness of his presence, it was too much. I felt my defenses crumbling, the walls I'd built around myself breaking under the weight of everything I'd been holding back. Before I could stop myself, I reached for him, my fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. I don't know how to do this, I whispered, my voice trembling. You don't have to, he said, his hands coming up to cradle my face. We'll figure it out together. And then he kissed me. This time, there was no hesitation, no holding back. The kiss was deep, intense, filled with all the things we couldn't say. His hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt my body melt into his. I shouldn't have let it happen, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the feel of his lips on mine. The warmth of his touch. The way he held me like I was the only thing that mattered in the world. Nathan, I murmured against his lips, my voice breaking. I'm here, he whispered, his forehead resting against mine. I'm not going anywhere. His hand slid down my arms, his touch slow and deliberate, and I shivered under the intensity of his gaze. He guided me gently backward until my legs hit the edge of the couch, and we sank down together, his weight pressing into me in a way that felt both overwhelming and impossibly right. Time seemed to blur, each moment melting into the next as the world outside faded away. His touch was warm, steady, grounding me even as I felt like I was falling. When it was over, the room was quiet again, the stillness broken only by the sound of our breathing. Nathan lay beside me, his arm draped over my waist, his face buried in the crook of my neck. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice raw. For what? I asked softly, my fingers brushing through his hair. For making things harder for you, he said. I shook my head, tears stinging at the corners of my eyes. You didn't, I said. I think I've been making things harder for myself. Nathan lifted his head, his gaze searching mine. What happens now? He asked. I don't know, I admitted, my voice trembling, but we'll figure it out. The faintest hint of a smile tugged at his lips, and he pulled me closer, his arms tightening around me. For the first time in years, I felt a strange, fragile sense of hope, a feeling I thought I'd lost forever. The morning light crept into the living room, painting the walls in soft shades of gold and amber. I woke to the weight of his arm draped across my waist, his breath warm and steady against the back of my neck. For a moment, I let myself stay there, eyes closed, heart full and heavy all at once. But then reality returned, sharp and unrelenting. I shifted gently, slipping out from beneath his arm. The blanket we had pulled over us fell to the side, and I tucked it back around him as he stirred slightly, murmuring my name in his sleep. My chest tightened at the sound, but I forced myself to move away. The kitchen was cool and quiet, the early morning sun streaming through the window above the sink. I busied myself with making coffee, the familiar motions grounding me as my thoughts raced. What had we done? My fingers trembled as I poured water into the coffee maker. I couldn't stop replaying the night before. The way he had looked at me, the way his hands had steadied me when I felt like I might break. For so long, I had felt invisible, like the world had moved on without me. But with Nathan, I swallowed hard, setting the pot down on the counter. This wasn't just about me, it was about him, about what this meant for both of us, about the lines we had crossed. The sound of footsteps behind me made my heart skip, and I turned to find Nathan standing in the doorway, his hair tousled, his shirt wrinkled. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, soft, searching, like he was trying to gauge where I stood. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped into the kitchen, leaning against the counter as he watched me. "You're up early." I couldn't sleep, I admitted, avoiding his gaze as I reached for a mug. Nathan didn't respond right away. Instead, he crossed the small distance between us, his hand brushing against mine as he took the mug from me. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I hesitated, my throat tightening. "I don't know," I said finally. He nodded, setting the mug down on the counter. "Last night? It was a mistake," I said quickly, cutting him off. The words felt sharp and heavy, and I hated the way his expression faltered at them. "You don't mean that?" he said, his voice steady but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "I don't know what I mean," I said, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. I don't know how to do this, Nathan." "You don't have to figure it all out right now," he said gently, stepping closer. "But don't pretend it didn't mean something." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and the raw honesty in his eyes made my breath catch. "It did," I admitted, my voice trembling. "It did mean something, but that doesn't mean it's not complicated." "I know it's complicated," he said, his tone firm, "but I'm not scared of that. I need to know if you feel the same way." I closed my eyes, the weight of his words pressing down on me. "I don't know how to answer that," I said softly. "Yes, you do," he said, his voice quieter now. "You're just scared to say it." He was right. I was terrified of what this meant, of what might happen if I let myself feel what I'd been trying so hard to deny. "I don't want to hurt you," I whispered. "You're not," he said, his hand brushing against mine. "You won't." The warmth of his touch, the steadiness of his presence made something inside me crack. I looked at him, my eyes filling with tears, and for a moment I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way through this. "Nathan," I said softly, my voice trembling, "I don't know what happens next." "Neither do I," he said, his thumb brushing against the back of my hand. "But whatever it is, we'll figure it out. Together." His words settled over me like a promise, fragile but unyielding. I nodded, my chest tight with a mix of fear and hope. Later that morning, after Nathan had left to run errands, I sat by the window with my coffee, staring out at the garden. The storm from earlier in the week had left everything damp and vibrant, the flowers heavy with dew, and the grass lush and green. The house felt different now, quieter, but not in the way it had before. There was a weight to the silence, a sense of something shifting beneath the surface. I thought about Nathan, about the way he had looked at me this morning, the quiet conviction in his voice. He believed we could find a way through this, that what we felt was worth fighting for. And maybe he was right. For so long, I had buried my own needs, my own desires, telling myself they didn't matter. But last night had reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten, that I was still alive. That I could still feel. The future felt uncertain, the path ahead blurred and treacherous. But as I sat there, the morning sun warming my face, I felt a small, fragile spark of hope. Maybe, for the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. Maybe I was finally beginning to live. As the hours passed, I found myself thinking less about the risks and more about the possibilities, about what it might mean to let myself be happy again, even if it was complicated. When Nathan returned, his eyes found mine, and in that quiet, unspoken moment, I felt something shift. The story wasn't over. The moment he pressed the button, I felt the unmistakable jolt. And from the way Lucas's eyes widened, I knew he realized exactly what it controlled. It was supposed to be my private indulgence, a way to escape the crushing monotony of my days in this house. Philip was always away on business, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the deafening silence of a too-big home. But now, Standing in the living room with Lucas staring at me in stunned realization, my secret was out. "What the hell?" he muttered, looking down at the small remote in his hand before his gaze snapped back to me. I tried to recover, to pretend it wasn't what he thought it was, but my body betrayed me. The heat in my cheeks, the way I couldn't meet his eyes, it all told him the truth I desperately wanted to deny. His voice dropped, quiet and incredulous. "This is yours, isn't it?" "Lucas, don't," I whispered, taking a step back. But he wasn't letting this go. He stepped closer, holding the remote up like evidence in a courtroom. "So what happens if I press it again?" "Lucas." Click. I gasped, my breath hitching as the device in question did exactly what it was designed to do. My knees felt weak and I gripped the edge of the couch for balance. His expression shifted then, the teasing smirk fading into something darker, more intense. And that was the moment everything changed. Philip had always been a man of ambition, a trait I once admired, but now resented. Our marriage began with promises of partnership, of a life shared equally. But somewhere along the way, I became an accessory, a piece of decor in his carefully curated existence. He worked tirelessly, his focus always on the next deal, the next merger, the next flight to somewhere far away. At first I tried to fill the void. I threw myself into renovating our sprawling home, hosting dinners, and volunteering for local charities. But the novelty wore off, and the loneliness set in. A quiet ache that grew louder with every passing year. The arrival of Lucas hadn't helped. Lucas was Philip's son from his first marriage, a boy I had barely known until he came to live with us. At 23, he was everything Philip wasn't: impulsive, passionate, and unapologetically honest. He had a way of filling a room, his presence magnetic in a way that made it impossible to ignore him. He had returned from college a few months earlier, after a fight with his mother about his future. Philip, ever the fixer, offered him a place to stay while he figured things out. I suspected it was more about control than kindness. Philip had never been one to let loose ends dangle, and Lucas's independence was a thread he couldn't ignore. I didn't expect to feel anything for Lucas beyond the polite indifference of a stepmother. But from the moment he arrived, there was a tension between us, unspoken, unacknowledged, but always there. The day everything changed started like any other. Philip had left early for a week-long business trip, leaving the house unusually quiet. I spent the morning tidying up, trying to chase away the restlessness that had been creeping in for weeks. I was in the living room, rearranging the throw pillows on the couch, when Lucas wandered in. He was barefoot, his hair still damp from the shower, and carrying a coffee mug with the words "World's Okayest Son" emblazoned on the side. "Morning," he said, flopping onto the couch. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. He picked up the TV remote, flipping aimlessly through channels. "You don't mind, do you?" "Of course not," I said, though his casual presence had already unsettled me. As he leaned back, his hand brushed something nestled between the couch cushions. Frowning, he reached down and pulled it out. "What's this?" he asked, holding up the small black remote. My stomach dropped. I recognized it instantly, the sleek, discreet controller I thought I had tucked away safely. "Nothing," I said quickly, my voice sharper than I intended. He raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Nothing, huh? Then why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" "Lucas, give it to me," I said, stepping toward him. He pulled it back, his grin widening. "Relax, I'm just curious. What's it for? Some kind of sound system?" I reached for the remote, but he dodged me, holding it out of reach. "Lucas, I'm serious. Give it back." And that's when he pressed the button. The look on his face shifted instantly as the realization dawned. His smirk faded, replaced by something else entirely: curiosity, amusement, and a flicker of something darker. "This is yours?" he asked, his tone soft but deliberate. I didn't answer, my face burning with shame. "Oh, it is," he said, leaning back against the couch. "Interesting. Lucas, please, just give it to me, and let's forget this ever happened." He tilted his head, studying me like he was seeing me for the first time. "I don't think I can forget this." I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I reached for the remote again. But he didn't move, his eyes locked on mine. "What else are you hiding, Evelyn?" he asked, his voice dropping lower. "Lucas, stop," I whispered, but my words sounded weak even to me. He leaned forward, holding the remote just out of reach. "Why?" Are you afraid I'll find out who you really are? Something inside me snapped then, the weight of years spent pretending to be someone I wasn't crashing down all at once. You don't know anything about me, I said, my voice trembling with anger. Then tell me, he said, his tone soft but insistent. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The tension between us was unbearable, the air charged with everything we weren't saying. And then, without thinking, I grabbed the remote from his hand and stormed out of the room. I spent the rest of the day avoiding him, the weight of the encounter pressing down on me like a physical force. But, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the memory of his voice, his gaze, the way he had looked at me like he was seeing through every mask I had ever worn. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I heard a soft knock at my door. Evelyn? His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. I didn't answer, my heart racing as I listened to him open the door and step inside. We need to talk, he said, his tone softer now. Go back to bed, Lucas, I said, my voice trembling. He didn't move. Not until you tell me the truth. I turned to face him, my breath catching as I saw the intensity in his eyes. What truth? I whispered. His gaze didn't waver. The truth about you. About us. His words lingered in the dark like an open door, daring me to step through. The truth about us. The room felt suffocating, my thoughts colliding with one another as I struggled to find solid ground. There is no us, Lucas, I said, my voice trembling. He stepped closer, his silhouette framed by the faint glow of moonlight streaming through the curtains. You don't believe that? Not after today. I sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around me like it could shield me from the weight of his gaze. What happened today was a mistake, a misunderstanding. You keep telling yourself that, he said, his tone calm but unrelenting. But we both know it's more than that. I wanted to deny it, to push him away, but the truth was already clawing its way to the surface. The days that followed were a blur of tension and carefully avoided glances. Lucas seemed content to wait, to let me wrestle with my own thoughts while he carried on as though nothing had changed. But it had. Every time we passed each other in the house, the air felt heavier, charged with unspoken words and stolen glances. It was a quiet afternoon when the dam finally broke. Philip was still away, the house silent except for the faint hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. I was folding laundry in the living room when Lucas walked in, his expression unreadable. We need to talk, he said, his voice steady but firm. I didn't look up. There's nothing to talk about. Stop lying to yourself, Evelyn, he said, stepping closer. You're not afraid of this because it's wrong. You're afraid because it feels right. I dropped the shirt in my hands, the words cutting through my defenses like a blade. Don't, I whispered. Don't what? He asked, his tone softer now. Don't tell the truth, or don't remind you of what you already know. I turned to face him, my chest tightening as I met his gaze. You don't understand what you're saying. I understand more than you think, he said, his eyes searching mine. I've watched you, Evelyn. I've seen how lonely you are, how hard you try to hide it. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, and I looked away, unable to hold his gaze any longer. This isn't about me. It is, he said, stepping closer. And it's about me too. I'm not some kid, Evelyn. I know what I feel, and I think you feel it too. His words hung between us, daring me to deny them, but I couldn't. The first time it happened, it was almost an accident. We were in the library, a room Philip rarely used, but one I had claimed as my sanctuary. I was standing by the window, staring out at the garden, when Lucas walked in. I didn't mean to scare you, he said, his voice low. You didn't, I replied, though my hands trembled as I set down the book I hadn't been reading. He closed the door behind him, his footsteps soft against the carpet as he crossed the room. I've been thinking about you. Lucas, I can't stop, he said, cutting me off. No matter how much I try, I can't get you out of my head. I turned to face him, my heart pounding as he stopped just inches away. This has to stop. He shook his head, his eyes locking on mine. You don't want it to stop, neither do I. His words were a catalyst, breaking through the last of my resistance. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I reached for him, my fingers brushing against his as he closed the distance between us. The days that followed were both exhilarating and terrifying. We were careful, always watching for signs of prying eyes or suspicious glances. The house became a minefield of secrets, each room holding its own risks and rewards. In the kitchen, our hands brushed as we passed each other by the sink. In the hallway, a fleeting touch on my arm sent shivers down my spine. In the library, under the cover of shadows, we whispered confessions that felt more dangerous than any physical act. But the thrill of secrecy came with its own price. Every stolen moment was a reminder of the line we had crossed, the rules we had broken, and the lives we were risking. The first real threat to our secret came in the form of Victor, Lucas's childhood friend. He had stopped by unannounced one evening, his easy charm masking a sharp wit that made me uneasy. "Nice place you've got here," Victor said, his gaze lingering on the family photos lining the mantel. "Lucas always said his dad married well." I forced a polite smile, feeling Lucas stiffen beside me. "We like it," I said simply. Victor smirked, his eyes flickering between the two of us. "You seem close," he said, his tone laced with something I couldn't quite place. "Victor," Lucas said, his voice edged with warning. "Let's not make this awkward." Victor held up his hands in mock surrender, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't done digging. Later that night, Lucas found me in the kitchen, his expression tense. "He knows something," he said, his voice low. "Victor?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "He's not stupid," Lucas replied. "And he's always been jealous of me. If he figures this out—" I didn't need him to finish the sentence. The stakes were already high enough without adding another player to the game. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Lucas reached for my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We stick to the plan. No one finds out." I nodded, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. The balance we'd precariously maintained began to tilt, and it wasn't long before cracks started to appear in our carefully constructed facade. The first complication came from Philip's business associate, Emma, a sharp and ambitious woman with a penchant for prying where she wasn't welcome. Emma had always been a fixture in Philip's professional life, attending his dinners, overseeing his projects, and inserting herself into his personal affairs whenever the opportunity arose. She was charming in a way that disarmed most people, but I had never trusted her. It started innocuously enough. Emma stopped by one afternoon while Philip was away, armed with a bottle of wine and an air of false camaraderie. "I thought you might appreciate some company," she said, handing me the bottle with a too bright smile. I forced a smile, ushering her into the kitchen. "That's kind of you, Emma. I wasn't expecting anyone." She shrugged, her eyes sweeping the room with the precision of someone cataloging every detail. "Philip mentioned you've been spending more time at home lately. I thought I'd check in." Her words were casual, but there was an edge to them that made me uneasy. "Just keeping things in order while he's away," I said, keeping my tone light. Emma's gaze flickered to the open door leading to the hallway. "And Lucas? How's he adjusting?" I froze for half a second. Barely noticeable, but enough to make my heart race. "He's fine. Why do you ask?" Emma tilted her head, a coy smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, no reason. He's just grown up quite a bit since I last saw him, don't you think?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Later that evening, I found Lucas in the study, his expression tense as he stared out the window. "Emma was here," I said quietly, closing the door behind me. He turned to face me, his jaw tightening. "What did she want?" "To make herself comfortable," I replied, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. Lucas stepped closer, his brow furrowing. "She suspects something, doesn't she?" "I don't know," I admitted, sinking into one of the armchairs. "But she's watching us. I can feel it." Lucas knelt in front of me, his hands resting on the arms of the chair. "We'll handle her," he said, his voice low and steady. "Lucas?" "No," he interrupted, his eyes locked on mine. "I won't let her ruin this. I won't let anyone ruin this." The second complication came from Victor. His arrival was as unexpected as it was unwelcome. He showed up late one night, grinning like he owned the place, his usual bravado in full force. "Thought I'd crash here for a bit," he announced, dropping his duffel bag in the foyer. Lucas stiffened beside me, his posture immediately defensive. "You could have called," he said, his tone clipped. Victor smirked, clapping Lucas on the shoulder. "Where's the fun in that?" He turned to me, his smile widening. "You don't mind, do you, Evelyn?" "Of course not," I said, though my stomach churned at the thought of him staying under our roof. Victor's presence was a constant source of tension. He had a way of inserting himself into every conversation, every interaction, his sharp wit always teetering on the edge of something cruel. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Victor leaned back in his chair, his gaze flickering between Lucas and me. "You two have gotten close," he remarked, his tone light but probing. Lucas stiffened, his jaw tightening. "We live in the same house, Victor. What do you expect?" Victor chuckled, swirling his glass of whiskey. "Fair point, but still. You seem to spend an awful lot of time together." I forced a laugh, hoping to diffuse the tension. "Lucas has been helping me with some projects around the house. It's been a nice distraction." Victor's smirk didn't waver. "I'll bet." The tipping point came one afternoon when Victor and Emma crossed paths at the house. Emma had stopped by unannounced again, her curiosity clearly piqued. Victor, ever the opportunist, wasted no time ingratiating himself with her. Their conversation filled with thinly veiled barbs and veiled glances in my direction. "Quite the setup you've got here," Emma remarked, her gaze lingering on the family photos lining the mantel. Victor grinned, leaning against the arm of the couch. "Oh, you should see the dynamics. It's fascinating." Emma's smile was sharp, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I'll bet it is." That evening, as I paced in the kitchen, Lucas stormed in, his frustration evident. "Victor's going to ruin everything," he said, slamming a glass onto the counter. "I know," I replied, my voice trembling. "He's already sniffing around, and now Emma's in the mix. It's only a matter of time before one of them puts the pieces together." "What do we do?" I asked, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Lucas leaned against the counter, his head in his hands. "We need to get ahead of this, before they do." The tension in the house was unbearable, every moment a careful dance around the truth. But no matter how hard we tried, the walls were closing in. The first crack appeared when Emma cornered me in the hallway, her tone casual but her words cutting. "You've been quiet lately, Evelyn," she said, her smile sharp. "Anything you'd like to share?" I forced a laugh, shaking my head. "Not at all, just busy with the house." Emma tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Funny. That's what Philip said the last time we talked." My breath caught, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. "And what exactly did he say?" Emma's smile widened. "Just that things seem different around here." That night, Lucas and I met in the library, the weight of the day pressing down on us. "We're running out of time," he said, his voice low. "I know," I whispered, tears pricking at my eyes. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." Lucas stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine. "We'll figure it out. Together." But even as he said it, I could feel the walls closing in, the inevitable truth waiting to shatter everything we had built. The confrontation was inevitable. With Victor's sharp intuition and Emma's prying eyes, the threads of our secret were unraveling faster than I could hold them together. Every glance, every stray word felt like a trap, a moment that might give away the truth. The tipping point came on a stormy evening. Rain battered the windows and the sound of thunder rolled through the house. Philip had returned unexpectedly, his presence filling the space with a quiet tension. He was in the study with Emma, discussing business, or so I thought, while Lucas and I tried to maintain the illusion of normalcy. But everything fell apart when Philip called me into the study. I entered hesitantly, my palms damp as I smoothed the fabric of my blouse. Emma was perched on the edge of the desk, her expression carefully neutral, but there was a gleam in her eyes that made my stomach twist. Philip stood by the window, his back to me, one hand clutching a tumbler of scotch. "Close the door," he said without turning around. I obeyed, my heart pounding. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Philip turned, his face unreadable. "I think you know." "Philip, stop," he interrupted, his tone sharp. He gestured to Emma, who slid a folder across the desk toward me. I picked it up, my hands trembling as I flipped it open. Inside were photos, grainy but damning, of Lucas and me. In the garden, in the library. Even in the kitchen, our stolen glances captured like pieces of evidence in a trial. My breath caught and I looked up to find Philip staring at me, his expression a mix of betrayal and fury. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You tell me," Philip said, his voice cold. Lucas burst into the study then, his presence like a thunderclap. "What's going on?" he demanded, his eyes darting between Philip and me. "Perfect timing," Philip said, his sarcasm biting. He held up one of the photos. Care to explain this? Lucas's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. You've been spying on us? Spying? Philip barked a humorless laugh. You think I need to spy to know when something's wrong in my own house? Philip, this isn't what you think, I began, but he cut me off. Don't insult me, Evelyn. You've been lying to me for months, both of you. Emma cleared her throat, her voice smooth and calculated. Maybe we should all take a step back. Emotions are running high. Stay out of this, Emma, Lucas snapped, his anger flaring. Emma raised her hands in mock surrender, but the smirk on her face made it clear she was enjoying the spectacle. The argument spiraled out of control, accusations flying back and forth. Philip accused Lucas of betrayal, of exploiting my loneliness. Lucas fired back, calling Philip a neglectful husband who only cared about his image. You were never there for her, Lucas shouted. You left her alone in this house like a ghost. And you decided you'd be the one to comfort her? Philip retorted, his voice dripping with contempt. I stood frozen, my heart breaking as the two most important men in my life tore each other apart. The breaking point came when Emma dropped her final bombshell. You know, Philip, she began, her tone almost casual, if you're looking for loyalty, maybe you should take a closer look at your own affairs. Philip froze, his glare snapping to her. What the hell are you talking about? Emma smiled, her victory complete. Oh, come on, did you really think I didn't know? All those late nights? The trips with clients? You've been playing this game a lot longer than Evelyn. The room went silent, the weight of her words settling over us like a suffocating fog. You're lying, Philip said, his voice low and dangerous. Emma shrugged. Believe what you want, but maybe you should think twice before throwing stones. Philip stormed out of the room, his fury palpable. Emma followed, her smirk still in place. Lucas and I were left alone in the aftermath, the silence between us heavy with everything unsaid. This is my fault, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. No, Lucas said, stepping closer. This is on him, on them, not you. I shook my head, my guilt threatening to consume me. I've ruined everything. Lucas cupped my face in his hands, his gaze steady. You haven't ruined anything. We're going to get through this, together. I wanted to believe him, but the storm we had unleashed felt unstoppable. The next day, the photos were leaked. I don't know how they got out, Emma's meddling, Philip's rage, or Victor's jealousy, but by morning, our lives were front-page news. The headlines were brutal, painting us as villains in a scandal that consumed the town. Philip issued a statement, cold and calculated, framing himself as the wronged party. Betrayal by those closest to you is the deepest cut, he said in one interview, his voice heavy with manufactured sorrow. Lucas and I were vilified, our names dragged through the mud by tabloids hungry for drama. The walls of the house felt like a prison, the whispers and stares of the outside world closing in. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lucas packed a bag. We can't stay here, he said, his tone resolute. Where will we go? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Anywhere but here, he replied. As long as we're together. I looked around the house, the life I had built crumbling before my eyes. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't face it without him. Taking his hand, I stepped into the unknown, leaving behind everything but the promise of what we could be. The drive was silent except for the rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt. Lucas stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, while I gripped the edge of my seat, my fingers aching from how hard I was clenching them. Every mile we put between us and the house felt like a breath of air after drowning, but it wasn't enough to erase the weight of what we'd left behind. The motel Lucas found was small and unassuming, tucked along the edge of a forgotten highway. The fluorescent sign buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow over the parking lot. We'll stay here for the night, he said as he grabbed our bags from the back seat. I nodded, too drained to argue. Inside the room I sank onto the bed, my hands trembling. The news had already begun to spread. My phone buzzed incessantly with missed calls and messages, each one another thread tying me to the wreckage we'd left behind. I turned it off, dropping it onto the nightstand like it burned my skin. Lucas knelt in front of me, his hands resting gently on my knees. Hey, he said softly, his voice pulling me back to the present. We're going to get through this. I met his eyes, searching for the confidence I lacked. How? Everything's falling apart. Let it, he said firmly. Let it all fall apart. We'll start over, just you and me. Tears filled my eyes as I shook my head. You don't understand. This will follow us forever. People won't forget. Then we'll make them forget, he said, his grip on me tightening, or we'll learn to live with it. But I'm not letting them take you from me. His words were a lifeline, grounding me when I felt like I was spinning out of control. I wanted to believe him, to believe that we could find a way out of this mess together. But the world wasn't so easily escaped. By morning, the scandal had reached its peak. Photos of Lucas and me were plastered across every news outlet, the headlines vicious. Stepfamily scandal rocks elite circles, one read. Another declared, from housewife to headline, the affair that shattered a family. Lucas sat beside me, scrolling through his phone, his face unreadable. They're painting us like monsters, he muttered. They're not wrong, I whispered, the guilt weighing on me. He turned to me sharply, his voice fierce. Don't say that. You're not a monster, Evelyn. You're human. And you don't owe anyone an apology for that. The motel phone rang suddenly, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet. Lucas and I exchanged a glance before he picked it up. Hello? His expression darkened as he listened. We're not interested, he said before slamming the phone down. Who was it? I asked, my stomach twisting. Reporters, he said grimly. They found us. By the time we left the motel, the reporters were already circling. A black sedan was parked near the entrance, its occupants pretending to check a map while their cameras peeked through the cracked windows. Lucas noticed them first and tightened his grip on my hand. Don't look at them, he whispered, leading me to the car. I nodded, keeping my head down as we slid inside. The engine roared to life, and Lucas wasted no time pulling out of the lot, the sedan following at a distance. Where do we go now? I asked, my voice trembling. Somewhere they won't find us, he replied, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. We ended up in a small coastal town hours away, a place where the salty breeze carried with it the promise of anonymity. The motel we found was older but clean, its cracked sign advertising ocean views that were barely visible through the fog. I stood by the window of our room, watching the waves crash against the shore as Lucas paced behind me. The tension between us was palpable, the weight of everything we'd lost pressing down on us. You regret this, don't you? He asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. I turned to face him, my chest tightening. What? Coming with me, he said, his tone laced with pain. Leaving everything behind. I hesitated, the truth too complicated to put into words. I don't know. I admitted finally. I don't know what I feel anymore. His expression softened, and he stepped closer, taking my hands in his. I know it's not easy, but I meant what I said. I'll never let them take you from me. We'll find a way to move forward, together. I wanted to believe him, to believe that the storm we had weathered was behind us. But as I looked into his eyes, I couldn't shake the doubt lingering in the back of my mind. The days turned into weeks, and we settled into a tenuous routine. Lucas found odd jobs to keep us afloat, while I kept a low profile, avoiding the outside world as much as possible. But the whispers of our past were never far away. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar face felt like a threat, a reminder that the scandal we had left behind could find us at any moment. One evening, as we sat on the beach watching the sunset, Lucas reached for my hand. Do you think we'll ever be free of this? He asked quietly. I looked at him, my heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. I don't know, I said honestly, but I know I don't want to face it alone. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of gold and pink, I let myself believe, for the first time in a long time, that we might find peace. Whatever came next, we would face it together.